3, 2, 1, start. So I got really interested in preserving the games for the original Nintendo Entertainment System in the early 2000s, because back then, not all the games were on the internet yet. And so I kind of dedicated myself in a weird way to tracking down the things that you couldn't get yet as a hobby. And what I quickly came to realize was that the best use of my time was to track down those games that were worked on but never sold to stores, because the NES in particular, it was kind of this weird, unique situation where the games were still relatively cheap to develop. They still only took maybe 3 to 6 months of work by like pretty small teams, but also everyone was making so much money that they just kept making these games. And also, Nintendo only let you sell 5 of these games a year if you were a publishing partner for Nintendo. So a lot of companies like Capcom, Konami, etc., they would just throw everything at the wall and be like, okay, these 5. And the ones they would leave behind were often like finished games that are pretty good. It's not like modern games that get canceled when they're in kind of a messy prototype state. Like in the NES days, a lot of these games were fully formed games that had rules and maybe even were like done. And so, researching this stuff and a lot of it involved just sort of trying to figure out, okay, well, what theoretically may have existed. And the way that I approached that was to collect literally every video game magazine ever published in the era of the Nintendo Entertainment System and go through each one and generate the spreadsheet of unshipped games and what issue they were in and whether they had screenshots and et cetera, et cetera. Which, once you have that information in front of you, you start to be able to sort of paint narratives. And you start discovering things like, they announced a Kung Fu 2 in 1987, but they also announced one in 1991 that's probably a completely different game. And it was, it turns out. And so actually, so the first step was sort of like what exists. Second step is like, okay, where is this stuff? The main source for preserving unreleased games from that era actually came from like review copies that were sent to the media. So a lot of video game magazines, back then you have a lead time of like 3 months before your content is actually seen by readers. And so, a publisher might send a copy of a game to a magazine and be like, here it is, coming out in 3 months, review it. And they might review that game or not. And then the game would get canceled by the time the issue shipped. And so the bulk of things we've come across were from that, but we've also we've contacted programmers and been like, hey, did you work on this? Do you still have it? Oh yeah, I have the only copy in the world of this entirely completed video game in my garage, maybe. And sometimes they would sometimes programmers would actually like contact me because like I started a website in 2003 called Lost Levels. I don't know if anyone remembers that. And I would post things like, hey, we found screenshots in a magazine of this lost game. And one time someone actually contacted me and said, hey, that's me. Oh my God, I didn't think anyone cared about this thing. I have it. Do you want it? Sometimes, as with a game called SimCity, we got stolen property from Nintendo from employees who took stuff home that really shouldn't have. But the biggest factor in preserving these games, the biggest challenge, is that these physical artifacts that contain these one-of-a-kind games in the collector world, that's like your piece, right? That's like I have a one-of-a-kind game that no one has. That thing's very valuable. That's the centerpiece of my collection. So a lot of my adult life has been dedicated to like wresting things away from people, because in the collector market, once the data is off of that thing and it's no longer a one-of-a-kind unique piece, like the value of that thing on the retail market like plummets. It literally goes from like 5,000 to like 500. Like it's like a 90% drop. Anyway, that's about out of time, but that's my area of expertise. And please donate to my nonprofit at gamehistory.org because we really need funding because it's really hard. I don't know how to fundraise yet. I'm really bad at this. I'm new. I do have a Patreon. I don't know if I'm allowed to keep talking though.
We will take comments, questions, and concerns. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was so good. Yeah. That was so good. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh, is it my turn now? Is that how
I
this
don't
works?
know.
It can.
Oh wait, you need to talk in the microphone, don't you? Maybe. I don't know.
Ish.
I'm done.
You did your thing.
Thank you.
You did the thing. Good for you. Shoot. Any volunteers? All right, cool. Yeah. It's a perfect segment.
Yeah.
Now it's gonna be weird if you're not.
I'll go.
All right.
I'll take the bullet. Okay. Let me know when you're ready. I should probably start a timer on my phone so I'm like vaguely aware of timing.
I think you turned it up.
Okay, let me know when you're ready. Okay, so I came across this very odd little thing that was called the Bayer Digit blood glucose monitor. It's for the Nintendo DS, and it is a blood glucose monitor with a pack-in game. And I thought that this was the strangest thing. I'm going to start looking into this. And it very quickly became clear that this was not something that Bayer made. This was something that one really, really dedicated guy who had a son with diabetes made, and then eventually Bayer kind of bought his company from him and took over. So what I'm talking about is the Gluco Boy. It actually came out for the Game Boy Advance at first, and it includes several games that are unique to the Gluco Boy. They've never been released in any other format, and they are not online. No one's ever like admitted to having a Gluco Boy, despite the fact that it was released only in Australia. And no one's ever found one. So the only two I know that exist belong to the inventor. His name is Paul Wessel. And Bayer, that has one in like a locked case. So in researching this, I ran into a dead end extremely quickly. So I just found this guy on LinkedIn and I was like, we have to talk about this thing. And he was thrilled, which was fantastic. So I got a really long interview out of the guy who made the Gluco Boy. And he talked about, you can't just like walk up to Nintendo and like knock on their door and be like, I have this thing, make it, So getting in front of Nintendo in and of itself was pretty crazy. He had to actually like know people who knew people and have someone champion his cause, and that ended up being Don James, who is still there at Nintendo today. It's like their oldest employee. So anyways, I was sort of starting to hit a dead end again, even after talking to him. I got a lot of really good, interesting information out of this guy, but we still didn't have any of those games. There were 3 mini games and 2 main games that are just completely lost, not on the internet. No one even really has played them. Like, no one's talked about having played them. And I ran into a forum post from a guy who said he used to work at the game studio who made them. So I tracked that guy down. And thankfully, he was like, that was his first game project. He was the director on that project, and he was like 22 at the time. And so this was sort of like a really big deal to him. And he kept everything. So, going through this research and just sometimes you are going to have to, like Frank was saying, talk to the actual people to find it. And the only reason we have this game now, and I have preserved all of his builds of the game, is because some guy thought to preserve this. When Bayer took over the company, they destroyed all of the remaining Gluco Boys. So there have been none. No one in Australia has kept one to our knowledge, and no one, there's not any new old stock sitting around anywhere. I'm talking fast. I thought I was gonna run out of time. Okay. But anyway, so going to the people and having to, honestly, kind of stalk them a little bit. Like, I had to find this guy's LinkedIn and, try to, okay, well, which one of them is this guy? And hope that they respond and send emails and hope that they're actually willing to talk to you. But when they are, you can discover some really interesting stuff. And this was definitely one of them. So there's 2 big games on here that are actually quite good. At least they're way better than they have any business being, for being on a blood glucose monitor, right? there's an RPG, and it is a fully done space RPG with like really good sprite work and like perfectly fine mechanics. I mean, it's like not a bad RPG called Lost Star Saga. And again, just confined to this medical device that some kids in Australia might have had, maybe. and then the other one is called Knock 'em Downs, and it is kind of like it's an action RPG that's sort of like Earthbound inspired. It's very, you know, in Earthbound you fight like grandmas and like just dumb weird stuff. You know, in this game you'll fight mailboxes and lawnmowers and clowns and just, you know, you have a sticky hand to fight them with. It's like really interesting stuff that I'm lucky to have found someone who cared enough to save it. So speaking to game developers is like a really huge part of game research. And sometimes you do have to hunt them down, but same way with the Lost NES games. That's really the only reason we have any of that kind of stuff. And yeah. I also ended up about to donate to Frank's to Frank's nonprofit gamehistory.org, patreon.com/gamehistory.org.
All right, I'm gonna do her idea. All right, so just let me know when to start the timer. Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so in a health psychology program, pretty much all you talk about is stress and all the things it can do to your body later in life, like cardiovascular disease, especially while you're being stressed in graduate school. It's really interesting. But anyway, one thing that really annoyed me about the video game literature is a couple articles claim that video games cause stress, but they only measured heart rate, which does not indicate stress by itself. You can have increased heart rate while watching a really funny movie even, or by self-reports like rate on a scale of 1 to 10, but you don't get any of that physiological measures like blood pressure or anything. So if you're really going to look at if they cause stress, you got to look at two things. Threat appraisals. So do they see whatever this is as a threatening situation? Because sometimes you can see something as challenging instead. So like you can go into an exam and maybe you're like, oh, I got this. This will be no big deal. Not really a threat. Or sometimes you think, I haven't studied at all, and this is going to be terrible. So that's a threat appraisal. And number two, you have to look at other physiological indicators. So blood pressure and stress hormones. So those actually tell if you have a stress response. So what I did is I did an experiment. So I had people play two types of games, Mortal Kombat and Tetris, because I wanted to do with two different types of video games. And so I had to stress them out somehow. So they can't just play the games by themselves. So for the challenge appraisal group, you say, oh, just do your best, it'll be fine. And for the threat appraisal group, you say, well, you have 15 minutes and you have to win all the matches. Or you have to get this many points. And they've done this in other stress studies too, so I replicated what other people had done. And the other part of it is while they're playing the game, you stand behind them, and then you say, you have to do better. Like, you have to get more points. And this is what they did in other studies too. Which, by the way, some people, when they get stressed, like, make really funny sounds. It's really hard to, like, stay serious and, like, tell them to do better while you're doing the study. But anyway, so what we found is people who appraised it as threatening, so they were told to do better, they did have increased heart rate, but no changes in blood pressure at all. So it doesn't look like that video games increase stress, like other things like public speaking or school exams or things like that. So it doesn't look like it matches what other studies were saying. So when they say they cause stress, I don't think that's really accurate. Now, the other thing we found is we also compared the two games, so Tetris and Mortal Kombat. And we did find that Mortal Kombat increased blood pressure. So that's one thing, like, you might want to worry about, because you worry about what might happen if people play games like Mortal Kombat all the time. But there's some good news. So there's a lot of nuances to it. One, we found that people recovered very quickly. So even though they had increased heart rate while they were playing, in less than 5 minutes, their heart rate went back down to normal, which is actually a sign of something very healthy. It means you have very quick recovery. You'd be more worried if it was sustained after whatever the event was. And so you can assume the same for blood pressure as well, is that it would decrease fairly quickly after playing the game. And the other thing that's really fascinating is we also looked at emotion ratings. So we found that the people who played Tetris reported a lot of frustration and anger compared to the Mortal Kombat players who reported more excitement and determination, and they had like a way more positive emotional response to playing the game. But they had the increased blood pressure, so I'm like, what the heck is going on? And the really fascinating thing is positive emotions also have protective effects against stress. So even though these games increase blood pressure, these positive emotions they create could also be protective. So there's some good and bad things here. And if you look in the game literature, nobody talks about positive emotions in violent video games, like at all. Like it's only aggression or frustration or anger. So it's just like this whole new point of research that I think it'd be cool for more people to do and talk about and think about. And oh my gosh, I'm early. Now I don't know what to talk about.
Patreon?
Yes, Patreon? I don't really
Tell
have
them
that.
to donate. SoundCloud.
Well, actually, just 2 weeks ago, I submitted it to a journal for publication. So here's hoping that it's accepted. So if it is, then you can all read it like on the public, in public for real, on the internet.
Get it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Is everybody having a good time so far? Awesome.
You're giving me time to extra. You good?
Don't
Nice.
worry.
Right. What was that?
Right.
All right.
All right. Let us know when you are prepared. Are you prepared? Getting there?
I am ready. Let me know when I need to start.
3, 2, 1, go.
Hi everyone. So excuse me. I like to make independent games as on the side, but this talk has major spoilers, including Mother 3, Undertale, Inside, The Last Guardian, and Killer 7. I'm flat out going to spoil the ending for most of these games. But this talk is about breaking the rules, the intense story beats.
That's it. I love those games.
Alright, so here's our spoiler right off the bat. In Mother 3, if you try to attack the final boss, which is the masked man, this message at the very top of the screen will show up saying, for some reason Lucas couldn't attack, or whatever your character name is. That is because it is revealed that the masked man is your loving twin brother who is brainwashed. In The Last Guardian, this big creature named Trico saves you after you're captured by a bunch of captors. But the interesting twist is that the captors themselves have these little shields that frightens Trico and kind of puts them in a paralyzed state. So this is kind of like the first time that Trico breaks that habit in an attempt to save your character. And then in Undertale, for one of the bosses, if you die to it, instead you get the "but it refused" message rather than the "game over" message. What do all of these moments have in common? Well, one, they break a pre-established rule, and two, they have a major emotional impact. It is, in short, a form of a story and gameplay integration. And I am hereby dubbing it the breaking the rule technique that I just came up last month. So why use this technique? One, it comes as a surprise. It's great for bringing up any sort of plot twist, any sort of revelations. It is very memorable, and it establishes a new rule, making that new rule become the new normal. I just noticed I didn't put this in full screen. So how to break the rules. There are a couple of steps that you need to kind of prepare yourself for before actually activating this. One, you have to establish the rules first. No duh. Two, you have to draft a narrative to build up to that climax. There's got to be a narrative reason for one to think that the breaking the rule is necessary and not like some cruel joke on you. And then 3, on the climax, break a rule without letting the player know. The major component that works so well in these games is that they don't tell you that you cannot attack the masked man, for example, at the very bottom. You have to find that out yourself. The game designers have trusted the player enough think that they trained the player enough that they think they're gonna just attack outright and promptly see the rejected message come after. And so that just makes the impact more, that just makes the message more impactful because they didn't see that coming, right? And either establish the broken rule as a new normal or make it clear that it will not be repeated again. You might have noticed that at 2 of these examples happens exactly at the end and never gets repeated again. Which rule should you break? For an uplifting twist, a good idea is to remove a limiting rule. So for example, Undertale is an uplifting rule breaking because a game over screen is it's by itself a very limiting act. It forces you back to the title screen and you're required to make your progress back again. But by removing that, they took away that restriction. Inside makes it so that your boy can kind of breathe underwater in one pivotal moment. From there, previously, the boy would always drown if they stuck in underwater for too long. For a tragic twist, deny a player's ability or power. In Mother 3, remove the player's ability to attack the final boss. And in Killer 7, introduce invincible enemies at the end, only defeatable by an unselectable but a narratively important character. Obviously, both of these are limiting and thus are more tragic as a consequence. The player themselves feels that they're not in control of the situation. What happens after a rule is broken? Repeatedly breaking the rules have a problem. Basically makes it less of a surprise. I'm sure a lot of JRPG fans will know the undefeatable boss is the most annoying thing ever. And repeating it a lot in all these rage games is terrible. A broken rule either has to be a new normal or the game has to make it clear it won't repeat it again. Inside's approach in particular makes it a new normal, so that's the example I brought up. But most examples usually just never have any segments that makes it clear that that instance can happen again. Oh, hey.
Well, I'm ready whenever. Yep. All right, so Climax out of the UK. It's not the Japanese company, and you may not actually realize what they worked on over the years, but they've been around since 1988, and they're still around today. So they are an important company for UK, and they were probably one of the top ones for a while. So one of the things that people like myself and Frank fear the most is when they hear that a studio is either shutting down or they're moving studios. So what happened in this case was basically a recycling company was brought in to dispose of potentially dozens of years of gaming history from this company because they were downsizing. Now they just make VR games. That's terrible. Luckily, this guy reached out to me and said, hey, we've got the stuff. We've already sold off a few thousand discs, which have gone who knows where. But he had these data tapes. Now, unlike an NES ROM, which can be, what's the maximum size of an NES ROM?
Rachel?
Megabyte.
Oh, wow.
The biggest tape that I received from them, and that's about half of them, about 100, goes up to 300 gigabytes. And of course, tape software, if you've never seen a data tape, it's meant to back up a lot of data fairly quickly, but it doesn't tell you a whole lot. So you have to figure out what software they use. You have to figure out how the heck you're going to get it off this tape. And then once you get there, what are you going to do with all this data? So some of the games that Climax worked on, Diablo on the PS1. They ported it to the PS1. They worked on a bunch of games that are canceled. Some of them I'll talk about. I'm trying to go quick. They worked on Sudeki, which was an Xbox game, which is kind of a Japanese-style Western RPG thing. Basically, it wasn't very good. And that's the story with a lot of these things. But what's unique about tape backups is it's not just a final ROM. It is the computers that they were working on, the directories that they were working on. So whatever they were done working on that day is what was backed up. So that means not only do we have game builds and source code, but we have things like email. We have things like pictures that they took at company parties. But it also poses challenges because we have things like passports that they scan for travel purposes and other credit card receipts and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of challenges with it. But what I wanted to do quick is highlight some of the stuff that was in there. One of them was the Elder Scrolls Oblivion Travels, or some way that they put it. They changed the name a few times. But it's basically a PSP version of Oblivion. It started as being a port, but then they realized, hey, the PSP isn't very good. So they couldn't actually put an actual Oblivion on. So they created this whole thing. They announced it. Then they canceled it after basically stringing along people for 2 or 3 years. Turns out Bethesda doesn't even have a copy of it. They didn't have a copy of it. So nobody knew about it. Nobody knew anything beyond a few screenshots. Because these are tape backups, not only do we have, I forget how many builds were recovered, but basically every little piece along the way. Not just that, but also the tools that they use to make every single piece along the way. So you don't have to reverse engineer all these different formats. You can also, you can just dive right in exactly how they did it. You could restore their machine, their build machine, and have it going. But what's interesting about Climax is, yes, they had these big projects, but they also, they're a pitch studio. They're a studio that made their livelihood by saying, we want to make this game. And one of the ones that I love to talk about when I get a chance is a game called Power Babes. There's this weird mobile property, and it's not based on the comic book or anything. But imagine that a bunch of 30, 40, 50-year-old UK white men decided that they were going to make a game for girls about dating. So imagine, and this is a game that they pitched not just around the studio, but they made prototype builds that they showed to Sony and were very, very close to getting signed a few times. So imagine, you create your character, you customize her however you want, then you go to the bar and try to pick up men. And they thought that this was the title that girls wanted to play. There's a game based on Metallica. It was a car combat game. This one, as far as being announced on a Metallica CD, they put a trailer out. Then nobody saw it again. Ghost Rider, that was one that actually did come out. Well, Ghost Rider led into them being able to do a Silent Hill game called Silent Hill Origins, which actually had another interesting life. It was originally called Silent Hill Original Sin. But what was interesting about this was there was a trailer that was leaked a few months before they actually announced the game, and it was called Silent Hill Next. It was a shaky cam, like imagine the worst footage ever. Nobody knew where it came from. But because we have tape backups, not only was I able to confirm that this was an actual trailer that they must have leaked because there's no other way for it to get out, but then I could also re-render it in 4K so you could see it in a way that you just simply couldn't do before. Even when you're talking about remasters today, Silent Hill, the HD collection, was terrible because they didn't have the source code. They didn't have any of these files. Here they are, lots and lots of data.
So in the time of listening to this, I realized, wait, I do actually have interesting things that are somewhat academic to talk about. So you should start.
I'm just waiting for Bill to say, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so I guess I do have interesting things to say. I'm trying to bring MAGFest to universities. And in this process, while I've been doing promo for MAGFest at all these conventions, I've learned to talk shop to pretty much everyone. I wasn't able to get them here, but I impressed the board of the Montessori schools. They were just randomly also at Anime USA having a board meeting, not part of Anime USA. And I was just like, I got them to buy badges and walk around, and their minds exploded. And we have free badges to go to them in March, so we're going to figure out that still. I've been trying to find words that make people get what MAGFest is. And, like, this is not official MAGFest, because there might be some rules about calling yourself a museum, but MAGFest is a living cultural museum that preserves the art and history of video games and video game music. We share that history in the best possible way by throwing an awesome party. You can't share an experience of video games by putting a console on a pedestal behind glass like you can a painting. You have to experience them by playing them. And when you phrase MAGFest in that way, people just, like, it breaks down a wall to non-gamers. They go, oh shit. And it's not the question of, like, are video games art? Are they things? It's like, this experience, now I can explain why this is important and why you should care. And my goal right now is working with Tim to get a bunch of Mages panelists to universities, because we could literally we have at times been in these rooms till 6 in the morning because we're stupid and really we're huge nerds, and we don't have enough MAGFest. So we are trying to get mages to do recurring events at universities, and once we get 1 or 2, then every other university will be like, well, why don't we have that? And then trying to sweeten the pot by throwing in like jam clinic, because they're looking for more space. They're doing like this musician to musician teaching, which is like, I don't speak music, but it sounds really cool. And I found a university that doesn't have a performing arts. Maryland Institute College of Art is strictly fine arts. They're like, no, we don't do music. We only do fine arts. But they have a video game design program. I'm like, you can't have video games without video game music. Hey, guess what? We know a thing or two about specifically the one genre of music you actually need to have. So we're in talks with them to get new space, and I've been throwing this idea around, and the board of MAGFest is like, oh yeah, I know the president of UMBC. I'm like, well, did you not think to do this? I'm like, no, we just didn't have time. So that's why that's why I'm staff and doing things. And I really like promoting MAGFest. Like, I can't not promo MAGFest. Even when I'm at MAGFest, I have 5 swatches because, they're cool. You should buy them. Wear them to bars and stuff because they light up to color. Yeah. That's most of my talk. I can just go on more about MAGFest.
Oh, you're so good at this.
Do you need all of our contact information?
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Sign us up.
So I want all of your contact information. I want to start with a local university to where I am, Baltimore area, because I can. But we need to do more mages parties. We need to do more of this. We need to figure out why we can explain things to each other and just get it so quickly that, like, this is a non-standard education when you come to a MAGFest. And I feel like I learned here. I went to school for game design, and you could spend an entire semester, and then you come to a MAGFest panel or 2, and then end up in a room party, and now you know more than like an entire 3 classes in game design. It's crazy. And I'm trying to get that to be more common and not to just be this like weird fan run thing. It's like, no, this is actually legit. Like, and from all the musicians I talk to, that's also the way that they're like, we come to MAGFest, I barely play an instrument, and now I'm in 4 bands. So I don't understand music, but like that's apparently what happens, and it's also just fun, and people who don't get video games get music sometimes. So, hey, I want to throw all your students a big party. But we want some space to actually do academic stuff, please. Like, that's kind of a weird way of getting us in, but, it's cool. Plus bringing more arcades, getting more of this. Yes!
And we're done. We can go home, right?
No. Now for the main event.
Hold on.
All right, you have to fill the next 17.
Hold on.
Do you need my computer?
No. But then after this is Q&A,
Yeah.
where people can have an opportunity to dive deep, because I feel kind of bad that we gave them such like tasty little nuggets. Sorry, I have to put my dissertation paint on real quick.
So when you guys became doctors, did they give you lab coats?
No, but
I
my
wish.
coworkers at Gearbox did give me a scarf because I was the 4th doctor at Gearbox. So they gave me a doctor scarf, and that was really sweet.
Yeah.
They're
And one
kind
of
the best.
And one of my friends gave me a sonic screwdriver after I defended.
That's so good. That gives
I
them
know.
great. I super can't, but you guys are so hard. Yeah, but not in 5 minutes. Not 11 technically. 9 in the PhD program. And BD. All right. And away we go. Hi, everybody. So I am a woman who is both a musician and who adores video games. And one of the things that I've noticed in my trajectory as both a rock musician and as a gamer is I saw a lot of the same kind of narratives come up vis-a-vis gender. So the idea that women are not often as represented in the actual canon itself. Women are not represented in terms of being the producers of these works. And if a woman does decide to show up and play a video game or play rock music, oftentimes they have to prove themselves twice as hard to be taken just as seriously as a lot of the guys do. And I thought, there might be something there. And I like music, I like video games, and so my major professor said, why not study both? And so this was born. So in my research on Rock Band and Rocksmith, I wanted to look at a few things. One of them was, in what ways are these games, could they be considered gendered? And in what situations does that show up? Is that visuals? Is that text? How does that work? Now, in terms of these discourses that I mentioned about women not being represented, not being creators, not being treated great when they do enter the realm, are these norms replicated in the video games themselves? When you want to translate what rock music is into a video game, does all that gendered baggage show up? And what opportunities are there to subvert all of this, if they exist? So how did I do it? Well, I looked at things in a specific way that I didn't see necessarily replicated in the research, which was, instead of just reading the game as a text, like one would say, like literature or a movie, I wanted to look at it holistically. So looking at the creators that make the thing and talking about their own lived experience that went into the game, looking at the game itself and seeing what is actually on disc or online, and also looking at the players that play the game, also knowing that, especially nowadays, players can give feedback to the creators through a variety of different ways that could then in turn impact things like DLC or even future iterations on the franchise. So how did I do it? It took 9 years, but I frickin' did it. So I interviewed the creators at both Harmonix and Ubisoft, took tours of their office, basically talked to them about what it was that they kind of wanted to do in making these games. I interviewed players, and I played the games themselves, and I also got, thank you Harmonix, an entire dump of all of the text in Rock Band. Every bit of loading screen text, every bit of like customization screen text, all of it. And I analyzed it like you would an interview or any other piece of text. Also, because I mentioned up front that I am a woman who is a musician and plays video games, I could not divorce myself from this research. Objectivity is a myth. So I also have an autoethnography chapter where I explore my own experiences, not only as a musician, but as a video game player, and also my little turn as being one of the folks responsible for helping to market the original Rocksmith as well as Rocksmith 2014. So what I find, these are gendered products and they show up in interesting ways. So things like the set lists, did an analysis, and then you find out that, yeah, it does kind of replicate a lot of what you see in rock music, where women are not only not as represented, but when they are there, they tend to be singers instead of actual instrumentalists, which might be okay for something like Rock Band, but in Rocksmith, if you're a woman and all you are is a singer, then what's the point if you don't show up in terms of playing guitar or playing a bass, right? And even things like loading screen text. Despite Harmonix's best efforts and actually interviewing a writer who said, I tried to have a gender neutral view in terms of all of this stuff, there was still a sound guy reference that made its way into a game. I also found that these things exist not just in the game, but in the marketing of these games, right? For the initial marketing in Rocksmith, the first Rocksmith, there was a line that kept getting barked out at an event that says, hey, come check out Rocksmith, the game that this one gaming website says is guaranteed to get you laid. If that's not inviting to all sorts of people to play your game, I don't know what is. Now, what it does, though, is what I did find that opportunities to subvert this stuff not only came from just showing up, just being a woman that exists in this space and being proud of it, but also in the creators themselves. For Rocksmith in particular, they saw that their player base for the first one was 99% male. And so they did an entire overhaul of not only the game's UI, but also meaningful set list design so that more women are actually being included in the game. If you can make your marketing and design inclusive, What's the harm in having way more people being able to play an instrument? It's the best. That's what I found. And there is so much more than that. But now that we've had an opportunity for everybody to say their piece, and my face is probably turned as red as my hair right now, Are you gonna do one? Oh,
Do it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim McNeil. I'm the founder of Mages and the coordinator of Mages. So while this was going on, there's a cool project that's going to happen next year, and we're thinking about how to present it, and I can do it in about 5 minutes, I think. So I'm going to continue. All right, so this year, MAGFest paid for me and Tom Heyer, who is the head of normal panels, to go to Russia to learn about what video games are like in Russia. During that time, we got impromptu meetings with the president of Russian esports, as well as people who ran museums of Soviet arcade machines, as well as the top gaming journalist in Russia, a guy named Anton Loganov. It's essentially sort of like a Jeff Keighley. He was the first guy who started a video game magazine in Russia. As well as a group that's the most MAGFest people who've never been to MAGFest. It is a group called the Retro Tech Squad that the first thing that they wanted to do with us is play Sega, play video game music, and get drunk. And that's pretty much exactly what they did. But it was interesting because we were at a music festival, and they waited to throw a concert just for us. They'd actually heard of MAGFest, and MAGFest inspired them to start their organization, the Retro Tech Squad. The Retro Tech Squad itself is basically a group that goes to different organizations and different events in Russia and shows them old retro games. And so essentially they keep track of Russian history. So what does this all mean for MAGFest in general? So this year we have invited many people for game history. Please, thank you. As you can see, but the idea is to bring these people that we met over to MAGFest and to make MAGFest a gaming convention that works as an international game exchange by basically doing international diplomacy through a love of video games. Yeah, it's that crazy in what we're doing. But that is what we are doing for next year. If you think you can be involved in this in any way, or if you're interested, please talk, because this is really, hopefully we don't go to war, really trying to happen. It's a sort of a thing, and we want to do it like every year with different countries of just going to different places, getting gamers from those places to talk about the history and the differences across all of those. And it's a thing that we're going to try to bring as a normal part of MAGFest on like a bi-yearly basis, but it's something we're shooting for. So yeah. 3 minutes left. Okay, cool, 2 minutes. But yeah, that's totally happening. Seems similar. Go.
Well, that was a whirlwind, wasn't it? We still have 7 minutes left. And wait, is this the last panel in this room? All right, cool. So I guess at this point, if anybody was sparked and inspired and has a question and wants us to clarify, maybe expand on anything that we didn't necessarily expand on, we would love to take questions from the audience. Ooh. Oh, do I have to pick?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your panel. No, I don't. It's our panel. We did it together.
Everyone gets a question.
All right, I think you were first by like 2 milliseconds.
All right, that works. All right.
I tried to keep it strong.
I know.
Because they sold their own product, which was similar. They did the Digit, which is a DS version of the same product, and it's much worse. But they did a whole campaign with Nick Jonas, the Jonas Brothers, and put big flyers up in hospitals and everything, and you could walk into CVS and you could buy this thing. It was like a real product they were doing, but yeah, they basically just wanted to bury the old and out with their new product. I'm with you.
Andrew, I think you should answer this question also, but
Yep.
What do we do with like unreleased games that we archive or pre-release or whatever. My approach traditionally has been throw them on the internet because that's the safest place. If everyone has a copy of the game, then it's probably never going away, and I really believe in that. But now that I'm an adult and run a 501c3 about this, I haven't quite navigated that yet, to be honest with you, because I don't know that we've really written the rules on this kind of work yet. So, like I've kind of been circumventing it by, I'll give you an example. So on Christmas, we published the results of about a year of research on an unshipped Nintendo version of SimCity that Nintendo was actually doing internally in Japan. They came out for the Super Nintendo, but like the Nintendo version's like the predecessor of that version. It's actually really cool. And we uploaded the ROM to the internet, but we didn't lay claim to having done that. We said that the ROM was uploaded to the internet. It's very passive language, and it's the Internet Archive's problem, not ours. So it's there now, and I really want to figure this out because I mean, this could have been its own 5-minute rant, but I really want to push the idea of video game source code as being an academic educational resource to learning how games are made. And, that's true. Yeah, we do have a grant with. You can talk about the grant for a second.
Yeah, so this is, like you said, it's kind of an ongoing issue, but part of what we're doing to get to that is we got a grant, an IMLS grant, with the University of Washington, and that is to try to figure out at the very least how this stuff might be sorted and searched for. It's not in and of itself building a database or an archive or a way to have all of it, but it's getting the structure and trying to make the rules.
Yeah,
and
I mean, sorry.
Yeah, we're about a year into that, and it's a lot of interviews and stuff. And by the way, if any of you guys do that, if you use game ephemera in any way, please give me your email, and I would love to have one of us interview you.
Andrew, what do you do?
All right,
things you that are very illegal for you to own.
So, like Frank, there's a point in your life where you grow up a little bit and you say, maybe I actually have something to lose. Maybe just putting things online isn't the best idea. That said,
you just had a child. Yeah,
I did. We'll give credit to my wife when she watches this one back on the cameras. But there are many games that I may or may not have had a part in putting online. That said, now I do work at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, and our policy is that whatever we have, you can come and access on site. That includes source code. We have the source code for games like River Raid by Carol Shaw. You can come and look at that. You can leaf through the original printed out source code that she gave us. I think we have source code for Polo. We also have an entire, basically whatever was left of the Atari coin-op division. We have that archive of source code of things that we're barely digging in, but that's part of my job. So we give people access to that. You come, we will set you up a computer. We're not going to give you a copy of it that you can then go upload to the internet, because then you're kind of in the same situation. But we want to give you access. And now, going back to my personal collection, I would like to see all of my stuff eventually end up at the museum too, because my goal always was get the stuff out of the closet, which I think is kind of Frank's thing of like, we're not just hobbyists. We are people who are extremely passionate and want to do this the right way, but we didn't really have another avenue to do it. And I think now we've both got platforms that we're doing it. We're making it accessible whichever way we can. And I hope you can use it. And I'm giving a talk too with Beth, the librarian at the Strong, on Saturday at 2:30. You'll hear a lot more about it. But don't be like turned off that you're not an academic type. We have students coming that are in high school that do research using these primary sources. Don't worry about it. If you're passionate about things, you can make an appointment. We have a collection of complete games for many, many Japanese platforms, material that you won't see anywhere else. Come, make an appointment. I know it's Rochester. It's not the most convenient place in the world, but it's nice. We have the garbage plate. It's really good. Come and eat one.
It's not literally a plate full of garbage. Rachel was next. I'm
Yes.
taking over for you,
No,
apparently.
please do. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I would have loved
We
that.
should.
Yep. Right. So I don't actually access the original. So what I've been doing is I wrote a script in Linux that will dump it, BD dump, and it creates an image file. What I had to do is figure out what sort of format those were. They ended up being a program called Backup Exec, which is a kind of industry standard, not just video games standard, but a lot of people use it. And they ended up not being encrypted. So what I do is I just simply extract those. Now, without actually going back to Backup Exec, I don't know if this tape then went into the next one. So one of the features of tapes is you can span it over as many tapes as you'd like. So I'm just kind of getting the raw data, making sure everything's usable right now. But I've also used Backup Exec to test, like, okay, I've created a catalog of files. It knows which tapes go together, so I can extract things exactly what they were. I can set it to save the file dates. I'm not doing that in the test things I'm doing because the program isn't very good. But I'm trying to preserve as much of it as original as humanly possible. Yep, so one of the big things we'll be talking about on Saturday is endangered media. Luckily, tapes have been fairly decent. So I've managed to back up, I have 200 tapes. I've backed up about 140 of them so far. But now I'm getting into the ones that aren't so nice. So one of the things that you can do is you can bake them. So I bought a food dehydrator, which you set it to a specific temperature range, and it will actually dry it out and hopefully give you a chance to read it at least once. With magnetic media, you know, who knows how these things were stored? They were probably stored in a closet, hopefully air conditioned. Well, maybe not in the UK. Hopefully kept relatively dry. But when you talk about floppy disks, that maybe they were stored in a warehouse or in 100-degree Arizona heat, which you may or may not hear about on Saturday. I mean, these things are failing very quickly, and that's why we're trying to be proactive. Do it now while the data, whatever's on there, is as good as it's going to get. It's not going to be any better tomorrow. So at least we get whatever we can off of them.
If you have anything on CDR, get it off right now. There was a question somewhere. Yeah,
Blu-ray, by the way, is failing quicker than any other optical media. Like in the span of 5 to 10 years.
Oh my
God! At least writable Blu-ray, but there's issues with actual Blu-ray press disc too.
I want to take the opportunity because you said it was a good metaphor. It was a perfect opportunity for me to use it. It feels like we are in the middle of the Library of Alexandria as it's burning.
Yeah. No.
And we're freaking out, just trying to save everything. But thank you for doing the work you're doing.
Don't worry, you can go on websites and download the majority of game history that'll never be back in print. Oh wait, that's gone now. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, you know, Phil, you should probably address this.
I was interviewed about this. Okay, so the exemptions. So there's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Every 3 years, they go through and people can petition to get exemptions in the Copyright Act, and it's usually for some educational purpose or some preservation purpose. We got an exemption in 2015 for video games, but it's for, try to remember specifically what it's for games that are basically phoning home to a server. So like if
so
you got
it's a single player game that needs to connect to a server for you to access single player content. It's very specifically not multiplayer games.
Yes, and so they put a petition in this year in 2018, I guess that's last year now, to expand it to include being able to like reconstruct servers, and the Copyright Office was less, it was a little less keen on that one. But we still have the exemption if there is a game that has to like connect to a server somewhere that doesn't exist. Museums and libraries legally can do that. But that doesn't really fall. I think the other preserving like other games kind of falls into other more nebulous fair use areas that are, I'm sure you can speak better to what like.
Right, and I think, again, this is just my understanding of the new exemption is whatever, we can recreate a multiplayer server, but it has to be from legally obtained source code. So that means we have to get the code from Blizzard if we want to make World of Warcraft. And like, honestly, to us, it's like, if we have the source code, if they've already given it to us anyway, like we've already gotten it legally. But I think the biggest thing is like if there's other libraries involved in it, like a lot of early network games connected to AOL servers, I think you might be able to get away with it. But it's a very vague exemption that we're not all that confident about.
The big example was the Maid Museum in Oakland. They got the source code, I think, for Habitat, which was an old LucasArts, actually, like online chat room adventure type thing. And to get it back online, they had to like break DRM on some like AOL owned tech or something, and like they could legally do that now with this exemption. So it's like it's a small...
So long as they don't use outside affiliate archivists.
Affiliate. If they want the exemption, they're like, we want to be able to like work with the community. And the Copyright Office was like, no, like absolutely not. You can't just like hire
have to physically
a random person.
work at the museum, or at least be on their payroll in some way.
The Habitat project was a volunteer. Like there was no museum staff who worked on it or anything like that. And the source for Habitat is Disney property, I'm pretty sure. Yes, so like Randy don't own that.
On the same sort of thing, one of the things that was on the Climax tapes were the SDKs for a service called Heat.net, also known as MPlayer. Not related to the movie player, but MPlayer is an online service basically predating Steam and all that, and it would connect players, kind of like Microsoft Zone did. So we found the SDK to that, which can actually set up private servers. And there's a game called Netfighter, which a company called Xerox worked on. They made a game called Scud. It's a game called Netfighter. You can't play it, and there's like no record of it because nobody was downloading and keeping around 50 megabytes of data back in 1997 or 8. So I'm hoping that the developer is actually willing to recreate some of what he made, but we'll see.
But these two, two over here. Should I handle it? You got it.
We'll stay as long as necessary.
Yeah. Well, have I got the panel for you?
Yes, I'm on that one too. Oh.
Come to wherever the room is at a Saturday afternoon at 1:30 for Joysticks to Journals. So you want to study games? Come on over. We'll tell you. But we can give you a little amuse-bouche before the Saturday panel about journals and publications. Mm-hmm. Whoever wants to jump in first. The forum. Thank you.
My particular favorite is Humans in Computer Behavior. Is the one I follow the most often.
The Museum of Play puts out one called the American Journal at Play. It's kind of, it's obviously through us. So there'll be game articles. There'll be other play, because the Museum of Play isn't a video game museum. It's a play museum that happens to have video games, because video games are play. So this will have everything from balls, toys, and all sorts of other things, but also games, including we have a women in games exhibit, which opened, and I think there's an article recently. So that's the one.
Also, I realized I just mixed it up. It's computers in human behavior, not the other way around.
I thought it was better the other way around.
Computer
That's
behavior.
hilarious turn of phrase.
I know.
You can also, come to MAGFest. And
Yeah.
By the way, the American Journal of Play is free, so that's always good.
Yep.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's also some stuff available via, follow me on Twitter. I retweeted a thread where someone was basically like, hey, if you want to do research about how games matter, here are some people you should cite. And so people like and even just sort of following these folks on Twitter as they're, or other social media, as they're musing on these things already. Folks like T.L. Taylor, Todd Harper, Henry Jenkins, depending on the kind of thing you want to research. My professor had me sort of go a little bit further back to like Julian DeBell, Edward Castronova. We have, thank you. Thanks for the follow.
Just got the notification.
Wow, I feel so special. So even like following academics wherever it is that they live on social media would also be like a really dope resource. Because then, you know, maybe there's a way that you can talk to them and get their conclusions without having to deal with a paywall. So that's a recommendation. I also have like an entire, you know, obviously bibliography of my dissertation that I can source, but you know, we can talk. There you go. I will give you my card. There you go. Ta-da. Anything else?
We have one more.
All right. Oh, it's yeah. Say we talking MLA, APA, ASA style. I mean, I kind of basically sourced the game. Well, I'm trying to think. Did I mean, I put it in the bibliography as like, you know, thing, year, harmonics, music systems. But yeah, I sort of referenced it. It's weird also when you're trying to create a written thing about an audiovisual thing. And so my dissertation is probably one of the most colorful in the world because boy did I slap a lot of screenshots in that bad boy to try and illustrate like a lot of points, especially because a lot of what I focused on was like, oh, here's like a literal visual difference in UI from one iteration to another. So in as much as you're allowed to sort of, you know, cheat page count by putting screenshots in there, you know, and as much sort of visual representation of that you can stick in as possible. But then otherwise, I think I probably just cited it like any other book, really.
Yeah, and mine, in the articles I read, I don't often see the games themselves cited in the reference section. Usually they're discussed in the method section under like materials or apparatus or something like that. And in that, it's simply they'll put the whole title of the game and then describe the features of the game that are relevant to whatever they're doing in the study. So it's actually not too complicated. The really weird thing is trying to describe a game to people who might not know what it is, like Tetris. It's like so obvious to gamers, but like trying to explain like what is Tetris to someone who's never seen it. Like, oh, there's this game where a bunch of falling shapes come down and you have to make rows of shapes. That's kind of interesting. But besides that, I haven't had really any difficulties writing it up in an experiment.
Yeah, and thankfully I had the benefit of having someone come before me because I was in a department in a Miami university where so much of the hot sociology topics are things like the Haitian diaspora after the earthquake or the Cuban diaspora, like longitudinal studies of stuff. One of my favorite colleagues, she did hers on romance tourism. What would colloquially be termed as like mail order brides, right? And I'm like, all of this brilliant work, and then I'm like, can I study video games? Thanks. Thankfully, I had someone come before me who, my dissertation defense was 45 minutes. I think her proposal was like over an hour and a half because she had to basically do the work before me, trailblazing, and be like, this is what I'm doing, and this is why it matters from a sociological perspective. So thank you to our four folks who helped kind of pave the way. But it's definitely an interesting challenge trying to figure out how to, you know, and you sound super fancy when you do it, right? You know, a game of falling shapes. Like, yes, these are games that simulate a rock music performance through the use of plastic instrumentation or actual instrumentation with the use of quote unquote real instruments, because really what is real, you know? So you get to sound really fancy when discussing a video game. It's great. I think in the dissertation, because in the defense, I had to sort of, you know, you have to know your audience, and like not everybody is like, you know, F-seeing through the fire and flames, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I'd be like, yeah, so Rock Band and Rocksmith are games in which you simulate X through the use of this to X end. So I kind of had to like set that up and be like, what do these games do? And then why do they matter? That was the why does it matter came at the end. I was like, I swear I didn't just screw around for 9 years playing Rock Band. It matters. But yeah, you might need to have to do a little bit of that work depending on what department you're in or who your committee is. You might have to do a little bit of hand-holding. I had someone from my committee be like, so that's like in sports. And she kept trying to she made a lot of sports analogies because that was like the thing that she could cling to. You know, was like, oh yeah, so it was like Billie Jean King was like treated like really, really badly when she tried to play tennis and be super, super awesome, right? I'm like, yes, that is exactly like that. You know, so you have to meet them where they'll get it. But if you have a good committee, it should be that. Yes. Sure. We'll figure out a way to do that. Yeah.
Super.magfest.org. I mean, wait.
Right.
Well,
Yeah. After. Oh.
Follow her on Twitter. And then,
or you had an option.
oh, Phil.
Yeah, because you actually run this thing and you're cool. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I know it sounded like we were joking, but we literally found out 10 minutes before this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think I know what you're getting at. So I argued that it was different from other stressors than like public speaking or an exam. So like public speaking or exam, there's an element of more social evaluation, right? Because you're being judged by an audience or by a teacher. And usually you just have that one chance to get it right. Like if you totally embarrass yourself while public speaking, that's what everybody remembers. But the good thing about video games is you do have that recreational ability to do it over and over and over again and get the outcome you want. So there's not that element of social evaluation in the same way. Right. Correct. Oh, correct. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But like in both cases, they kept playing. There was no way they could get the score or beat all the matches within the 15 minutes. So in either games, they didn't achieve the goal in like the threat appraisal condition. But the difference is like even with both games, given those instructions, they didn't show a stress response. And I said that was probably because it's more recreational. People are used to playing it casually and replaying it over and over again. But like I don't know how that would replicate in like a competitive setting where, you know, you're playing a game and you have to get it right that one time when you're competing. So that might be a different situation than when you're playing in a study or playing while relaxing.
I have a question.
Okay.
Out of the two, which one did you find to be maybe the most like stressful?
Mortal Kombat more than Tetris.
Mortal Kombat more than Tetris. Okay, because I was curious. I was wondering if during the study was the music playing in Tetris?
Yes.
Because,
yes, it was.
Okay, because yeah. Because if you want to talk about a stressor, that could be an interesting, you know, the way that music actually kind of affects that potential emotion.
Yeah.
Writing about that. I'm trying to drag her pages.
Oh,
you should.
I don't know how to say her name. Lena Rain or Celeste music. She wrote a book
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
about like
Amazing
stress
game.
versus distress, and
Exactly, she
why
gets it.
in Celeste, the harder it gets, the more relaxed the music gets. Like the B sides are all much more calm overall than the A sides, even though I died 100 times to get through the A sides and 650 to get through the B sides because holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. And I think there are studies that show the music makes a difference. That they found some music. I think they were looking at Quake, like Quake 4, and they found like the music, like if they heard the music, they were more physically stressed out than if they didn't hear the music. So like music does play a role.
Yeah.
Some studies have found. Sure. I mean, yeah, it's definitely purposeful. They want people to have more arousal and get more excited. And
Nowadays, the modern game design tries to create adaptive music, where it's a little more fitting in the situation. Some games are more about being pumped, and there are some game genres like Katamari comes to my mind, where it's really difficult to have anything else other than a single theme. But like a majority of modern games nowadays have some form of adaptive music where they try to adapt the music to the current situation you're dealing with. So, technically speaking, it tries to cater the music experience to what you're actually experiencing, because everything should be supporting either the narrative or the gameplay, preferably both.
And back. Hi.
I think it's a lot like you were saying. You kind of speak to your audience. Like, it depends on who you're talking to, you know. So, like, you know, I think someone who's maybe like inspired more by money, right? You go into like how big the industry is and how many billions of dollars there are. But you know, if you're talking to someone who's not an asshole, then you know you could point at things like MAGFest, right? And like look at the cultural impact that games can have. But I mean, is that something that either of you like struggled with in the academic world? Because I'm a college dropout, so I can't speak to that.
It's gotten easier as the years go on. It gets easier because technology is so integrated into our daily lives. As someone in sociology or psychology, anything with human behavior, it's so relevant and so generalizable to the public and humans in general. And so I don't find it as hard to sell now as it used to be, especially with cell phones and like how the internet has changed. Also, video games are so unique because it's an active form of entertainment, not a passive form, like television or listening to music. So you get these more interesting situations, and you're able to see how people react in certain virtual simulations that you can't replicate in real life. So actually, it's a good opportunity to test some versions of human behavior that ethically you can't do in a real situation. So it just has so many opportunities that I've never found it to be a hard sell. And to a department, the other good sell is that it's so interdisciplinary. Like you work with people in computer science, you work with people in music, you work with people in art. It's so interdisciplinary, and departments really like that. Yeah.
That's the word. Another interesting sort of thing is, you know, kind of making analogies, right? It's kind of cool to have a space where classically an anthropologist might go somewhere else to the field to study a culture and study the iconography of a culture. Like Azeroth is an entire world with its own lore and people making guilds, different little societies that run themselves in particular ways. Hey, if you're a sociologist that's interested in the economy, take a look at an auction house and you know, take a look at things like microtransactions. Like, all of these things are really cool and interesting, kind of hip new ways of looking at pre-existing phenomenon, right? So I take a look at things like sort of like, you know, gender roles and sort of like a Goffman-esque thing about, you know, role theory in terms of sociology. It's like, all right, cool. How about someone who is literally playing a role in a game, right? You're taking somebody who wrote about stuff in the 50s and 60s, and then you're translating it and flipping it and taking it to a whole new level. And if your fellow academics aren't excited about, you know, ways that you can kind of dust off the old books and kind of, you know, turn them on their heads in this really cool new space, I don't know. This is exciting as hell. So
I'll add to it a little bit. Before I got to the museum, I had obviously been doing this on my own for a long while, but I actually went and got my master's and became a school librarian in New York. The reason for that was I did a poster presentation on video game preservation. I went to school at the University at Albany. I love the school. It's in New York. But these people didn't get it, unfortunately. And these were people who were doing research into video games, whether it's behavioral things. There is all sorts of research into how there are different interactions. There's AI, all this stuff. And these people kept coming up to me and saying, so what? They're video games. And these are people that should have cared about video games. So I guess my piece of advice is don't necessarily give up like I did, because I wanted to go on to get a Ph.D. in video game preservation or something along those lines, you know. And I think it can be hard to find allies sometimes that are willing to give you a listen. And my biggest thing was I wasn't willing, and I didn't really know how to reach out to different people that weren't where I was locally. And it's just something I think I've learned to do is just don't be afraid. Just find that person that is going to listen, because they're out there. I mean, based on the panel that's up here, we are out here.
Yeah. In my experience, doing lots of promotions for MAGFest, I've done like 100 hours at different cons everywhere I go because I'm a freaking nerd. I'm on the stage, you know, I can't help it. Thanks for promoting MAGFest for me, though. That's my business. Sorry. Like, it's, you got to try different approaches again and again and again until you find one that works. And you're gonna fail. And there's some people that you're not gonna get through. And that's okay, because there's so many other people out there. And the ones that are, what I've noticed over time, the better you get, the more practice you get communicating, the fewer and fewer percentage of people don't get it. Because you've either A, gotten better at communicating, or B, society is somehow really adapting a lot. In the decades since I studied game design when I was 20, 30 now. The difference between the acceptance of video games culturally in the last 10 years is like enormous. From my perspective. Yeah. But yeah, just try different ways. I found, you know, the thing, Living Cultural Museum, as a way of describing MAGFest. That's just like, oh, for so many people, it's suddenly they're like, oh, that matters now. And we're a giant party, right? Like, yeah. If I try to be like, yeah, man, MAGFest is this great party, we got arcades, and, you know, like, we're preserving history. It's like, what? What, huh? Like, you just sound like, but if you say, yeah, we're a living cultural museum, to an academic, that means something. So.
Just find that common ground where they live, find the analogy, find the metaphor that works, and then springboard from that, I guess.
And also, people aren't getting it by now. You know, when you can go to Target and get like 12 different T-shirts of old video games, you know, and like freaking Spielberg's directing the Ready Player One movie. That please don't watch that. Like, come on, like Smithsonian American Art Exhibit, like toured the friggin' video game thing for like 5
name
years.
dropping the Smithsonian is fantastic. To say that we're there, oh, so good.
Yeah,
sorry.
Tomorrow we have the Smithsonian doing a panel. It's Art History 101 for gamers.
Word.
Yeah.
Awesome.
On a completely different angle, one of the more interesting things that are kind of emerging from a game design perspective is that we're finally having a solid vocabulary on a lot of things that never had terms before. Now that we all know what the heck ludonarrative dissonance stands for and how nobody likes that term at all.
Magic Circle? What?
Magic Circle is another good one. Flow, risk versus reward. This presentation here is me trying to invent a term, break the rule.
Compulsion loop.
Yeah. But but that's really cool. And that might also be another angle that you can kind of approach in academics. Like I said, long story short, having a better dictionary for being able to talk about patterns being used in games can only make the medium better. It has obviously drastically improved the art world with terms like hue and saturation. It obviously drastically improved the music world, and I have no reason to blend movies and all sorts of stuff. So that's another angle that you can try approaching as well.
I will say, don't be afraid to reach out to any of us, I would say. At least on my end, I know Frank has many, many resources as well. Like, we're happy to help you in whatever way you can, whatever research you're doing. We want to know about it because, again, we were you sitting in the audience at some point. And it's just as important what you're doing as what we're doing. We have at least one of that.
You got this. The cool hat.
Thank you.
Yeah. These folks are amazing.
Literally right before the panel, we met this woman.
I breathed through.
We're like, oh, we should maybe go to bed early tonight. We got a long weekend.
You did great.
Thanks.
Cool. Good. More. I don't know. Anything else? Whatever, man. I can stay up. It's fine. Whatever.
I want to do more of these late night panels now.
Yeah.
Oh, we got one tomorrow. That's true.
Yeah.
There's a midnight panel tomorrow called Weird Stories from Video Game History. True Weird Stories from Video Game History. At least 2 of us. 3? No, Andrew's not. Well, we're on
I'll
it.
be ready to go.
Phil's on it.
Yeah.
And Rachel, yeah. So come see us. In room wherever it is.
Yeah.
This room.
Oh, dope.
Yeah. Just
There you
don't
go.
leave.
Just don't leave. Yeah. That'll be fine.
Just
I'm trying to
park
get-
your seat so
You
no
smell
one
fine.
takes it.
23 more hours. You all smell fine. Yeah. So I don't know who has like business cards or whatever, but like you
Nope.
know, if you're interested in getting any of our
I have 2 business cards.
contact info, if
Pictures
you have
on your
one
phone.
business card,
They're good.
what you do is you have people take a picture of the business card and then they're good.
Well, they're in my room because I wasn't supposed to be on another panel today.
I'm not an academic, but I have a lot of business cards.
You can have a business card if you're a potential big donor.
There you go. Right. Make it rain. Yeah, I don't know. This was super fun, and I'm so happy that this ended up how it did.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that this worked out so well in front of the 500 pages.
Yeah.
Can we do this again, Tim? Next
Sweet.
year? That'd be great. All right, cool.
Cool.
Thank you so much for coming. Feel free to come at us with any other questions and stuff. We love you. Good morning and good night.